and welcome to Briefings for the Descent. I'm Ken Oswald, and this is Jonathan Barrick. And we're here today to talk to you about how to find and choose a good role-playing game for you and or your group. Do you like role-playing games?
Yeah, oh, I love role-playing games.
Okay.
Role-playing games are the best.
And do you shop around for role-playing games? Things you might be interested in?
Yeah, I know about 2 years ago I got introduced to, 4 years ago I got introduced to D&D 5th edition. I was really hard in on that for about a year or so, and then I got introduced to a completely different system that Ken had made, and it was, one was more just narrative driven, while the other one was more. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I'm just ruining it.
Well, you can, because that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. When you are looking for a particularly good RPG, one of the tools to kind of help you is understanding how role-playing games are made, how their rules are kind of directed, and one of the things you just said, narrative, is actually part of a role-playing theory model called GNS.
Ooh, what does that stand for?
GNS means gamist, narrativist, and simulationist.
Okay.
And these are three directions in which players are said to gravitate to in their play style. This includes how game masters run their games, as well as what players look for and enjoy in a game. And a narrativism or narrativist kind of game is one of those.
Okay. So what does the G stand for? Gamist, right?
So G is gamist, and gamist is for those players that like crunchy character builds. They like rewards, experience points, treasures. They like min-maxing their characters. They like the elements of a role-playing game that really makes it a game.
Sounds like D&D and Pathfinder.
Indeed. So I think Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition is probably a good example of a gamist edition. In fact, Pathfinder, D&D 3.5 also, Pathfinder, both its 1st and 2nd edition, looks like it's going that way as well. Games like the Black Hack, which is a rules-like D20 system. ICRPG is also another good gamist set. So yeah, all of those are examples of that. Narrativist, which you said blew your mind.
Yeah, really blew my mind. Absolutely.
Those are really about story-driven and collaboratively story-driven games. So they include cooperative scenario or world building, where both players as well as game masters build the milieu and even the adventures that they're in. Role-playing and character motivation features very strongly in the gameplay. Story narrative game mechanics are very important as well. So the very course of narrating action and motivation of characters and situations is actually triggered by game mechanics in those games. So those are very exciting, and we've got examples of those, which include the White Hack, Apocalypse World, which is really where all your PBTA, powered by the Apocalypse games, come from. Very big right now. Blades in the Dark, also a very narrativist game, and also one that several of you will probably be familiar with, Dungeon World.
Dungeon World is so
particularly
good.
popular, right?
So good.
If you want to mix up some gamist simulationist things and put it in a narrativist package, man, that is definitely it.
So simulationist. What is simulation?
So simulationist, this is a tricky one because simulationist is for people that like consistency, and this can be very important to role-playing gamers. Simulationist games have very symmetrical game mechanics, which means if I'm running the game and you're playing in it, I'm using the same rules and dice that you are to resolve things as a game master for my NPCs and my creatures. Now that sounds, most people are familiar with D20 systems and Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder. Many of you think, that's it, that's how games work. But surprisingly enough, they don't. A lot of games have asymmetrical elements or asymmetrical in their entirety, like Dungeon World and other PBTAs are called player-facing games. That means game masters like me don't roll dice, and we don't make up any sort of plots or sometimes even adventures. That's all triggered by decisions and game rules that you make. So simulationist games don't like that. They say we want a concise physics that everything works from, and that's what we use. To that end, world and event consistency is very important with those games as well. Established settings. So Starfinder, very established setting to play in. Star Trek, I think most people know Star Trek nowadays. D&D 5th Ed, well, D&D throughout a lot of its history has been very simulationist, and 5th Ed really, I think, leans on that pretty good. Games that have very particular flavor, like Legends of the Fire Ring, very focused, would all be good simulationist examples. Games like this also lean very heavily on prepared scenarios. So these are the games, if you don't want to do a lot of work, you want to go out and buy published adventures, that's where you're going to find the most material for those sorts of things.
Okay, so what is like the main difference between GNS and simulationists? Because they sound similar, especially
They
when
can be, yeah. In fact, a lot of mainstream RPG companies mix those two elements frequently, because when you're designing a game, a lot of players out there, especially in things like Pathfinder Society, even sometimes the D&D Adventure League, they like those games elements. It's adventurers and players, you know, they will tell you it's all about the stuff. It's all about finding the magic sword and gaining the XP. But at the same time, what really attracts people to games is often simulationist elements. The fact that you fight beholders in Dungeons and Dragons is a really important element of that game. The fact that you run into Romulans in Star Trek, also very important elements in that game. So it's all about the consistency as far as simulationist gaming goes, but definitely having a healthy dose of gamist elements in any RPG can be a lot of fun and attractive for people as well.
Okay. So I guess D&D was one of the first ones that kind of spawned it all. Where would you?
It was the first.
Yeah, the first. Yes. Where would you put the actual first edition D&D? How would you put that?
That's a very interesting discussion. I think I'm going to have to post a whole other video on that. That very first game, so Dungeons & Dragons, for those that don't know, evolved out of wargaming. And it was very strictly, came out of really Stratego and some other tabletop warfare games, Chainmail. So to that end, it was kind of simulationist leaning, because they really wanted to play within a very particular game world, but beneath that simulationist element, it was really gamist, because wargaming is about how many soldiers you can take out, actually winning the mission, and that is very, very, very gamist sort of things.
Okay, so how do you think D&D has evolved through that, especially with narrativists? I guess maybe being a little bit more prominent now.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, I think role-playing games in general are headed towards a more rules-like, scenario-driven, world-building kind of perspective. That's what people like about it. D&D 5th Ed is a much richer history now, has just a depth that you wouldn't believe in material that you can read about. Campaign worlds, it has Forgotten Realms is probably one of the strongest role-playing game campaigns that you can be in nowadays as far as detail goes. So it's come a long way. 5th Ed definitely leans way more that way than it does in its gamist beginnings.
All right, so maybe a really good question to ask you is, what do you prefer?
What do I?
What do you prefer?
I like a little bit of everything, but I'm probably nowadays. Yeah, I think any good RPG has kind of a mix of these things, but I personally really like narrativist games. It's a lot of fun. I definitely like some simulationist in there too, some history to throw in there, but ultimately narrativist games allows a group to create that together, and I really enjoy getting a group and running running it that contributes to all that. That not only are you playing an elf, but you're telling me about the entire elven race of this game that we're playing. And that's a very narrativist kind of game.
Yeah, honestly, that was one of the things that really blew my mind whenever you were making your Outer Stars RPG. You know, I came from playing only really D&D 5th edition, where it's more gamist and simulationist, and already pre-generated world and pre-generated context made by the dungeon master, the game master, and then we come to narrativist, and well,
then you're getting all the questions.
Yeah, me and 6 other or 5 other guys, or Ken's asking us like, hey, tell us about the universe, tell us about your world, tell us about your race, tell us about this bad thing that's happening, and that just really blew my mind.
Yeah,
it's like,
we turn that into a game.
Yeah, then we turn it into a game.
It's crazy fun.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. That was awesome.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So definitely take these tools about how games are written and the different elements of them, and use that as something to check out what you might be interested in. And let us know what you think about the GNS model of role-playing game theory and what some of your favorite games are. And we'll catch you next time.